Robert Downey Jr. is back in the MCU.
We give you the one person who could play Victor Von Doom.
He is not playing Iron Man. He is playing the man who wants to unmake everything Iron Man ever built. And buried inside that single casting decision, a decision Marvel spent years quietly setting up, is the answer to a question fans have been circling since 2019. If Tony Stark is gone and the actor who defined this entire universe is now standing on the opposite side of the battlefield, who is actually standing in the middle? Who's still carrying the thing Iron Man was supposed to represent? It isn't Captain America. It isn't Doctor Strange. It isn't even the new lineup the Russo brothers assembled for the biggest crossover since Endgame. It's a kid from Queens who spent the last decade quietly becoming the emotional center of gravity for the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. And by the time Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars are finished, Spider-Man may not just be Iron Man's successor. He might be the reason the MCU survives its own ending. Here's the strange part. Marvel didn't announce this plan. They never needed to. They've been building it in plain sight since 2016, one small decision at a time, and almost nobody noticed until the pieces started landing all at once this year. So let's go back to where it actually started, because the beginning explains everything that's happening right now. When Tony Stark shows up in Queens in Captain America: Civil War, it looks like a recruitment scene. A billionaire flies in, offers a nervous teenager a suit and a plane ticket, and takes him to Germany to fight his friends. On the surface, that's just world building. Underneath it, Marvel was doing something much more deliberate. Tony doesn't see Peter as muscle. He sees him as an experiment in whether he can build something better than himself. Not a better suit, a better person. Someone with his intelligence and his powers, but without the ego that nearly got the Avengers killed. That distinction matters more than it seemed to at the time because it's the exact blueprint Marvel has been following ever since. Every mentor figure in the Infinity Saga eventually gets removed from the board. Tony sacrifices himself in Endgame. Natasha sacrifices herself on Vormir. Steve hands the shield to Sam and walks into old age. Marvel wasn't just killing off Phase 1 heroes for the sake of stakes. They were clearing space. And the person they kept quietly building up to fill that space, film after film, was never Captain Marvel or Doctor Strange or any of the cosmic-scale characters everyone assumed would inherit the franchise. It was Peter. Look at how Infinity War and Endgame actually treat him. He's not just another hero in a big ensemble. He's the one Tony personally shields, personally worries about, personally can't let go of. The dissolving on Titan scene isn't there because Spider-Man is popular. It's there because Marvel needed the audience to feel Tony's death as a parent losing a kid, not just a hero losing a teammate. And it worked. That single scene generated more raw emotional reaction than almost anything else in Infinity War, precisely because by that point, the Tony and Peter relationship had quietly become the emotional spine of the entire saga. Then, Tony dies, and instead of resolving the mentor-student arc, Marvel does something much colder and much smarter. They let it stay unfinished. No Way Home picks up that thread in a way most viewers didn't fully register in the moment. Peter loses Tony's protection, loses his own name, loses May, and ultimately chooses to erase himself from the memory of everyone he loves so the multiverse doesn't collapse. Compare that to what Tony does in Endgame. Both of them make a decision that guarantees personal annihilation in exchange for protecting the people around them. Tony gives up his life. Peter gives up his entire identity. It's the same sacrifice, just translated into a version a teenager could actually make. That's not a coincidence. That's Marvel finishing the sentence Civil War started. Tony didn't just want a better version of Iron Man, he wanted someone who would make the sacrifice without needing the ego trip first, and by the end of No Way Home, that's exactly who Peter has become. Which brings us to where things get genuinely uncomfortable, because Brand New Day doesn't let Peter recover from that decision. It makes him live inside the consequences of it. 4 years after No Way Home, Peter is alone in a New York that has no idea who he is, not misunderstood by the public alone, the way Spider-Man usually is in the comics, actually alone. No May in his life the way she used to be. No easy friendship with Ned and MJ because they've moved on to build lives that don't include him. He's working a full-time, thankless, unglamorous job as Spider-Man in a city that will never say thank you. And the film frames that isolation as the direct cost of the choice he made at the end of the previous movie. And then Marvel adds something the trailers made clear, but almost nobody expected. The isolation is starting to change him physically. The pressure of carrying that weight alone triggers something the film treats as a genuine mutation, a shift in Peter that he can't fully control. It's not a new suit, it's not a new gadget from a Stark lab. It's his own body responding to years of trauma and solitude by becoming something more dangerous. Think about what that actually represents. Tony's version of heroism always had a safety net, resources, tech, a company, a legacy fortune to fall back on. Peter's version of heroism by Brand New Day has none of that. He is becoming stronger specifically because nobody is there to catch him if he falls. Marvel spent 9 years building a mentorship story and then spent one movie proving the lesson only counts once the mentor is completely gone. That's the version of Spider-Man director Destin Daniel Cretton and screenwriters Chris McKenna and Eric Summers put on screen, pulling Peter into direct conflict with a resurgent Kingpin and an upgraded Scorpion, while pairing him with Frank Castle, the Punisher, in a partnership the filmmakers have said was shaped by the actors themselves. It's a pointedly street-level story, closer to the tone of the comics than anything the trilogy has done before, and that choice is deliberate. Before Marvel lets Peter stand next to gods and time travelers again, they're making him prove he can carry the weight completely on his own, which is exactly what makes his absence from the next Avengers movie so interesting. Here's what's confirmed. Avengers. Doomsday assembles one of the largest casts in franchise history. The current Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and characters from the X-Men films, all converging under Robert Downey Jr.'s Dr. Doom. And as of the film's official cast reveal, Tom Holland's Spider-Man was not among the names confirmed to return. Now here's where we have to be careful, because this is the part where speculation and confirmed facts start to blur, and a responsible investigation keeps those two things separate. Marvel has not explained why Peter isn't part of the main roster. What we do know is that Brand New Day was filming at the same time as Doomsday, which made a significant dual role logistically difficult for Holland, who was carrying his own film as the lead. We also know, based on trailer footage and reporting around the film, that Brand New Day is positioned to take place just before the events of Doomsday, which raises an obvious question. Is the movie quietly explaining why Spider-Man isn't standing with the Avengers this time? There's a persistent, unconfirmed rumor that a different Peter Parker variant appears in Doomsday's opening sequence, possibly tied to Tobey Maguire. Marvel has not confirmed this. Treat it exactly as what it is right now, a rumor, not a fact. But even the existence of that rumor tells you something about how Marvel has trained its audience to think. After No Way Home, the idea of multiple Spider-Men existing in the same story isn't a gimmick anymore. It's baseline MCU logic. And if Avengers Doomsday is genuinely about incursions, universes colliding into each other because the multiverse itself is collapsing, then a Spider-Man variant showing up isn't just fan service. It's thematically exactly what the movie is supposed to be about. Which is where Robert Downey Jr.'s casting stops being a headline and starts being the key to the entire theory. Doom in the comics isn't simply a villain. He's frequently framed as the dark mirror of genius unchecked by conscience. Brilliance without the humility to know when to stop. Sound familiar? Marvel didn't cast Downey as a coincidence or a stunt. They cast the actor who spent over a decade teaching audiences what it looks like when intelligence is paired with growth, specifically so he could now show audiences what it looks like when intelligence is paired with its absence. The in-universe explanation reportedly ties Doom to a Stark variant from another timeline entirely, which means the MCU is about to put two versions of the same core idea directly across from each other. The Stark who learned to sacrifice himself for people he loved, and a Stark-adjacent figure who never did. And if Doom is the corrupted answer to what happens when you have Tony's mind without Tony's growth, then Peter is the film franchise's answer to the opposite question. What happens when you take everything Tony tried to teach, minus the fortune, minus the tech, minus the ego, and let it grow in someone who actually listened? That's not a coincidence Marvel is hoping you'll miss. That's the entire thesis of the last 10 years, arriving at the same moment on two different screens. So where does this actually go? This is where we move fully into logical projection rather than confirmed plot, so hold on to that distinction as we get there. Secret Wars, currently set for December 2027, is built around the storyline of the same name from the comics, a saga defined almost entirely by the multiverse tearing apart and reforming into a single battle world. There have been persistent industry reports and social rumors suggesting Tom Holland could play a significant role in that film specifically, even though his name is notably absent from Doomsday's confirmed lineup. Holland himself has publicly said he hasn't started production on the next Avengers films and doesn't know the details yet, which is either a genuinely honest answer or the most disciplined non-answer of his career. But look at the pattern instead of the rumor. Marvel builds emotional through lines for years before they pay off. They did it with Tony and Peter for nearly a decade before No Way Home. If Secret Wars is genuinely about the multiverse converging into one reality, the most powerful storytelling move available isn't giving Spider-Man a supporting role in a 50-person ensemble. It's finally putting every version of Peter Parker and everything he's sacrificed across 2 universes worth of films at the actual center of the story that decides what the multiverse becomes. And that idea isn't new. It's not even originally Marvel's. Brand New Day takes its title directly from the 2008 comic arc that reset Peter's status quo after the controversial One More Day storyline, where Peter's identity and personal history are fundamentally rewritten to strip away everything he'd built. The MCU version doesn't copy that story beat for beat, but it borrows the emotional architecture almost exactly. Take away the support system, take away the recognition, force the hero to rebuild himself completely from zero. Marvel has openly returned to this well because it worked in the comics for the same reason it's working on screen right now. Audiences don't just want to watch Spider-Man win, they want to watch him prove he can survive with nothing. Which brings us back to where we started and to the real answer hiding underneath the surface of this entire era. Iron Man's legacy was never really about the suits or the tech or even the Avengers initiative he built from scratch. It was about a man who spent his life protecting people at increasing personal cost until the cost was everything he had left to give. Marvel has spent 9 years quietly making sure that idea didn't die in a snap of purple fingers or a final handshake on a battlefield. They transferred it, scene by scene, into a kid who was never supposed to be the center of the universe, and who is now, by every measurable pattern in the storytelling, exactly that. Robert Downey Jr. isn't coming back to remind us who Iron Man was. He's coming back to prove what happens to that legacy in the wrong hands. And somewhere in the middle of that collision, isolated, transformed, and finally standing entirely on his own, Peter Parker is quietly becoming the only person left in the MCU who can prove Tony Stark was right about him. If you caught the connections we pulled together here, or you've got your own theory about where Secret Wars is actually headed, drop it in the comments. And if you want more of this kind of deep dive investigation into the MCU's long game, make sure you're subscribed, because Marvel isn't finished setting this up, and neither are we.